So, the best way to see Dublin is in the hands of a whiskey shepherd. And if you watched the last video, you know what I'm talking about. So in 2019, I was in Dublin with Rex. We were actually invited by Waterford Distillery down in the south tip of Ireland, in a Viking village, actually. And while we were there, and they were super kind and generous, we went down to shoot an episode with them. Middleton heard we were going and reached out to us and invited us to the Middleton Distillery, which is actually not that far away from Waterford. And we thought, that's cool, let's go see Middleton. But when we finished all of that trip, and we had some, the episode from that you can see on Whiskey Tribe, it was a great time. And the Waterford episode you can see on Whiskey Tribe. And but we ended up in Dublin, and at the end of our trip, and we met up with a bunch of magnificent bastards. I had never been to Ireland before. This was my first trip to Ireland, and I'd always wanted to go to Dublin. As you know, I'm an Irish whiskey guy. I love Irish whiskey. It's been a huge part of my story. Before we got to town, I was reached out to by a guy named Stuart Quayle, and he worked at a shop that's, I looked it up, it's now closed, which breaks my heart, but it's called the El Mulligan Whiskey Shop. And he reached out just to say, hey, I'd love to show you around. And I said, hell yeah, that sounds amazing. So when I got to Dublin, we checked into our hotel, and then I looked up, reached out to Stuart, and we met up at a local bar. And he said, I've got a whole evening planned for you. We're gonna visit these like 8 different pubs. I was like, wow, that sounds like a lot, but okay, here we go, I guess. And so he took me around, and he was just such a gracious host, and I don't know what he's doing anymore, but Stuart, if you see this, comment so I can find you again. Every pub we went to, they had prepared a lineup of special edition whiskeys for us, and we met the owners, and they just took care of us like kings. And I just kept thinking, like, who the is this guy? He knows everybody. He's amazing. And each experience was, that's good. Each experience was better than the last. And so sure enough, we made it through. We went to, I think my favorite memory, cornerstone memory of the pubs we hit was the Palace Bar, where we ended up in the upstairs room, and the owner poured me a bottle of Dingle that was specifically bottled for the Palace. And we listened to a trad band play in the corner, and people singing along, and it was like the most quintessential tourist moment for me of the whole trip. But then we went to a final pub, sat down in a corner, and got a half pint of Guinness and a whiskey. And as we're sitting there sort of like finishing up our night, supposedly, in walks a very well-dressed Irishman carrying a rolling bag suitcase. And he turns to Stuart, and Stuart says, hey! And he says, hey, and they know each other, and he orders a pint and joins us at the table. And that starts a whole new part to my evening. But first, Bushmills 12. So this is a fairly new, more recent release in like their new lineups. But this is the single malt, 12-year-old single malt. This is triple distilled Bushmills, all barley, copper pot still. 11 years in sherry and bourbon casks, and then transferred into Marsala barrels. Now, Marsala, like the dessert wine. And man, I have not had very many Marsala finished whiskeys. This is one of them. There's this dense, syrupy sweetness to the nose that's really rich. This is a beautiful nose. It's got that same buttered pastry shortbread base, and then that sort of fig and plum. And then there's like sugared dried apricot, and then a deep sort of syrupy layer going through it. Man, that's good. It's got everything I love about Irish whiskey, but with this sort of like dark fruit exterior. It shows up as not quite a finish, but like this exterior layer, like a chocolate covered cherry, like an exterior layer that coats this thing and then sort of lingers behind as it finishes. And the aftertaste is totally milk chocolate almost. Wow. Way to go, Bushmills. That's probably going to sound terrible on camera, but that's lip smacking good. Okay, so I'm telling you this story because this is one of my favorite Irish stories of our trip to Ireland. This guy sits down, he says, "Hi, my name's Fiona," and I immediately think that's the most Irish name I've ever heard. And he sits down at the table and we start talking, and he turns out to be a brilliant whiskey nerd who's shockingly knowledgeable, very well spoken, and I start asking him questions about Irish whiskey, and I'm in nerd heaven. Like, this would bore a lot of people, but I was just right on my home turf. And the bar starts to close up, and so he says, "Why don't you come back to my place and I'll show you some other cool, weird, interesting whiskeys." It's like, well, okay then. So now I'm like 7 or 8 pubs deep. I haven't finished everything, just so you know, because the bar owners, all those pubs poured us so much, we just kind of moved through and was like, thanks. Thank God, or I had to be in the hospital in Dublin. That wouldn't have been fun. Anyway, we walk through these neighborhoods and end up in this apartment of this guy, Fionn, and Stuart, and I just am trusting Stuart, like, this guy's not gonna murder us or something. Like obviously Stuart's fine with them. I trust Stuart, so we're probably gonna be okay. And we walk into this apartment, and it's a great, and he opens up a closet in this apartment, and it looks like the whiskey vault, the original miniature, like the smaller whiskey vault, just jammed with whiskey of all kinds, and like unlabeled things and single casks, and like, and he starts pulling out stuff and we're trying things, and it's just amazing. And I look down on the table and I see my favorite Irish whiskey book that I think ever written about Irish whiskey. It's called A Glass Apart. And I use it to teach the whiskey sommelier school. It's a book I recommend to everybody I can. I love that book. And I look at the book and I say out loud, and this is, look, it's embarrassing, but it happened. So I say out loud, and as I say it out loud, I realize what an idiot I am. I say, "Hey, I love that book. That's my favorite ever book about Irish whiskey, and I think one of the great books about whiskey in general, written by Fionn O'Connor." Wait a minute. And he looks at me, and Stuart looks at me, and I realize this is Fionn O'Connor, and I'm hanging out with the guy who wrote my favorite Irish whiskey book in his apartment, drinking glorious Irish whiskey. And I would say I felt like an idiot, but I only felt like an idiot the day later when I woke up because we drink a lot of Irish whiskey. That night, I somehow managed to get out of there and Uber home. And by home, I mean to the hotel. And I woke up the next morning going like, what happened? Was that real? And guys, look, it might not be. There's a very real chance that I had so much whiskey with Stuart that I just dreamed the rest of that. But I'm pretty sure it happened. It felt real. Let's just put it that way. It felt real. And Stuart, if you're out there, comment and tell me it was real, for the love of God. Anyway. I only had that chance, by the way. I only had that chance because you guys in the tribe and this community of whiskey nerds surrounded us and put us on a platform, gave us a platform that was recognized and acknowledged as by other brands and other places in the world, who then saw value in bringing us out to show them to you. So that would never have happened if it wasn't for you guys. Cheers to you. I'm really glad you're here.